very interesting because I work with open source communities as a community manager, supporting them, trying to figure out, how to build up both the community as well as the ecosystem, how not to disrupt that ecosystem, or at least not too badly, to make sure that people find the project, have a way to join, and are able to stick around. Now, when it comes to things like communication, like chat tools or mailing lists, different communities prefer different things. And one thing that we are trying to encourage them to do is to pick something and try to stay there. Because if, the community fluctuates around tools and chat platforms, and we have just more and more popping up almost on a daily basis these days, then you're fragmenting the community and the ecosystem, and that's bad for you. So we're trying to talk to the communities and encourage them to figure out something and keep it to be stable. Now, obviously, FreeDOS has been around for 30 years now. So whatever you did and jumping around tools and trying to figure ways out, it didn't kill the project. Did you ever have challenges that you picked a new communication platform and it didn't work out, and then people got confused where things are? So what is your experience with that evolution and trying different things out?
Yeah, and we have tried some, a couple things here and there, but like we set up a Slack system at one point, and nobody really uses that. And so, it's like we're trying to funnel people to the mailing lists. I mean, that is the place where we try to have everything happen. We just try to follow like announcements and things like that on this other forum I mentioned, and but discussion happens naturally on the Facebook group. What's been bad, I mean, it is always like, how do you keep the community together, right? And so what's bad for a community, I totally agree, is that if conversation like gets split up, right? And so there was this period for a while where, and I don't know what started it, but people would have off-list conversations, and they would talk about things, and they would email, like they'd email somebody, and they'd have a conversation about something there, and then you'd find out about it sometime later. It's like, oh yeah, we've been doing this or that, and it's like, well, why aren't you sharing that with the list? That'd be great for us to know, right? Like somebody recently, like we do this. We also try to do this thing where we every month, or every other month, we try to do a video call. Now that we're in the Zoom era, where we kind of at least get to know each other as more than just an email. But we always try to bring those conversations back to the list, right? So we talk about something technical, we'll bring it back to the email list. But it was in one of those calls that I learned that somebody was like, oh yeah, I'm working on this or that. And I'm like, oh, you should be sharing that in the email list. And I'm like, oh, I've been talking to so-and-so about it. I'm like, but share that with the mailing list, right? Like, don't just like share one version with somebody and say, oh, you try this out, and then when it works, then we'll try it with more people. It's like, no, go release it wide, right? Make sure everyone knows about this. And so, it's like you find those things, you're like, please bring that back to the list, because that is a killer for community. And I think we're still kind of feeling the after effects of that. I mean, we were trying to push more and more stuff back to the email list. Certainly whenever people would email me for different reasons, and sometimes if you have never, not even part of the email list, you just like, oh, I just discovered FreeDOS because I learned about it in college class, or I read an article about it and I wanted to ask you about this or that. I'm like, all right, that's not an email list question because you're not on the email list. But if somebody who is part of the email list, ever emailed me a question, I'll reply back to them, but I'll put it back on the email list. It's like, all right, so you asked this question, and so here's my answer about it. And then we'll talk about it in the mailing list. Whenever I see stuff like that happen, I try to push it back to the mailing list, because that's where we need to talk about it, right? We can't have a community if it's just like islands of people, right? It needs to be, I totally agree with you. It needs to be the community. It needs to talk about this. And so that's absolutely what you need to have. I think that you've got sort of the younger generation that not so much in the mailing lists. And so I think that's why we're seeing more general user questions happening on our Facebook group, because that one's quite active. People asking questions about, oh, how do I do this or that? And a lot of them are questions of people who are clearly haven't used DOS back in the era because they probably weren't alive. And so they're asking questions that are kind of basic, and that's okay. And it's a very open group for people to say, oh yeah, well, here's how you do it, or here's how you do this or that. Here's an article about it, to be able to answer those questions. And so, having, I would say the non-technical conversation happening on another platform is totally cool. But definitely, if you're having a developer conversation, that needs to happen on the mailing list, because you're trying to keep that developer community going for that specific reason.
Yeah, corpus of common knowledge.